In the small coastal town of Brespirito, life flowed with a predictable calm. Here, everyone knew everyone, and almost nothing extraordinary ever happened, except for the summer festivals that drew tourists and the Sunday masses that gathered nearly all the residents. But a story, gradually revealed, profoundly shocked Brespirito, bringing scandal and unease, leaving behind a trail of secrets and pain. It all began with what seemed like an ordinary marriage between Lucas and Eva Brenner. The people of Brespirito had always considered their union somewhat unusual. Lucas, who grew up in the town, was a simple, hard-working man, a mechanic capable of fixing anything, from fishing boats to old cars. He worked in a small workshop on the town's outskirts, where the smell of oil and metal always lingered. Known as a straightforward and calm man, he valued honesty and loyalty. Eva, on the other hand, was quite different. Her family was wealthy, yet warmth and sincerity were always lacking. Eva's parents were rarely home, busy with their own affairs and careers. When she returned to Brespirito after years of studying in the capital, she seemed like a stranger among the locals, as if she couldn't find her place. She found a job in an art store, surrounding herself with paintings and flowers, but no one knew how lonely she felt in this small town. The townsfolk observed their relationship with interest and confusion. Their marriage, it was said, had been arranged by their families, to combine Lucas's financial stability with Eva's elegance and status. They seemed almost untouched by each other, like two different worlds under the same roof. Their wedding was discreet, without pomp or joy, as if it were a business deal rather than a lifetime promise. Although they lived together, everyone sensed that something was off. Years passed, and the town grew accustomed to Eva and Lucas not being like other couples. People said they rarely spent time together, as if they coexisted rather than truly lived together. Rumors circulated that Eva spent much time in the church, especially after Mass, staying to talk with Pastor Rafael Solis. Rafael, who had arrived in Brespirito a few years earlier, quickly became a respected figure. He was different from other pastors. With his charisma, he spoke to people in a relatable way, giving them hope. He found words that touched the soul, reminding them of the importance of sincerity and true faith. Eva found solace in the church, and no one saw anything unusual about it. For the town, it was normal to seek support and peace within the church walls. But over time, neighbors began to notice that she stayed longer than others after Mass and left with a mysterious smile. Rumors began to spread through the town, adding details as they went. No one knew what tied her to Raphael, but suspicions grew. Some thought Eva was only seeking spiritual guidance, while others sensed there was something more, though no one could have imagined that this innocent visit to the church would mark the beginning of the most scandalous and somber story Brespirito had ever witnessed. Rafael Solis came to Brespirito a few years earlier, like a gentle breeze bringing a sense of change. Young and charismatic, he stood out from previous pastors for his openness and willingness to listen to everyone who came to him with doubts or concerns. His sermons were deeply moving. He spoke of life, sin, and the struggle against one's fears, but above all, he knew how to offer a sense of peace and hope. For many in Brespirito, Raphael became a true spiritual guide. He knew how to touch the most sensitive parts of the soul, especially for those who felt lost or alone. He listened to each story attentively, offering comfort and dedication to every person. This is how he drew Eva Brenner, a woman with a difficult past and a lonely heart that sincerely needed support. Eva came to church every Sunday and always stayed after Mass. Raphael noticed her almost immediately. Her gaze was calm yet filled with sadness, but it also held a hidden desire to understand and find something real. She was seeking not only spiritual comfort but also a way to quell the loneliness that haunted her within the cold walls of a home where love was absent. At first, their conversations were brief and cautious. Eva asked questions about faith, seeking answers to doubts that had troubled her since youth. Raphael listened attentively, striving to find the right words to calm her. However, over time, their conversations ceased to be limited to religious topics. They grew increasingly personal and profound, revealing what Eva feared to admit even to herself. Raphael began to notice that he looked forward to Eva's arrival. He tried to justify it as part of his duty, but he increasingly understood that there was more than a mere desire to help. When Eva spoke of her pain, of the emptiness in her life, Raphael saw her not just as a parishioner but as a woman who needed to be truly understood. Rumors spread quickly in the small town of Brespirito, and some began to suspect that Eva stayed after Mass for more than just spiritual conversations. The townsfolk noticed how she left the church with a mysterious smile and how Raphael, barely disguising his confusion, followed her with his gaze. To most, these encounters remained a mystery, though some suspected something deeper. As Raphael and Eva tried to hide their feelings under the guise of formal conversations, their souls began to intertwine in a new and dangerous bond. In Brespirito, where everyone knew more about others' business than they should, the relationship between Pastor Raphael Solis and Eva Brenner was becoming a topic of growing interest. However, neither Raphael nor Eva could stop what was happening between them. Each time they met, their conversations grew more sincere, more profound, as if no barriers existed between them. Eva, accustomed to hiding her feelings behind a mask of sophistication, now allowed herself to be vulnerable. She began to openly share her fears, disappointments, and secrets that she had never discussed with even her closest friends. Raphael listened, and his calm, understanding gaze became a lifeline for Eva. He did not judge her, did not offer advice, he was simply there, genuinely attentive and kind. Eva felt her heart beat differently in his presence, awakening a passion she had never experienced with her husband. Over time, their meetings stopped being just spiritual support and became a personal necessity. Eva found more and more reasons to go to the church, even on weekdays when there were no services. She would bring Raphael cakes, freshly baked bread, insisting it was simply a gesture of gratitude for his help. But each time she stayed with him in the dim, quiet church office, the air between them filled with an inevitable tension. Raphael, though he knew such meetings were dangerous, couldn't and didn't want to give them up. He was surprised to notice he was beginning to see Eva not only as a parishioner but as a woman who meant more and more to him. Inside, his inner battle grew stronger. He knew that, as a pastor, he should remain a spiritual guide, but he couldn't deny the feelings he was developing for her. His vows and principles, of which he was so proud, were beginning to fade in her presence. One evening, when Eva arrived after a long day, they stayed talking longer than usual. The silence in the room gradually filled with heavy breaths and looks loaded with tension. Their conversation turned to more personal matters, and Raphael could no longer hide his unease or the attraction he felt. They were sitting close, and words were no longer needed. In a single moment, their gazes met, unleashing a wave of repressed desire that invaded their souls. It was in that moment, when their hands accidentally brushed, that the world around them seemed to disappear. Eva looked at Raphael with hope and fear, as if she knew that this touch would change everything. Their first kiss was timid, as if both were testing the limits of the forbidden. But once they tasted the forbidden, they could no longer stop. That evening, which was supposed to be just another conversation, marked the beginning of their secret relationship. From that moment on, their encounters took on a new meaning. They could no longer pretend it was only about spiritual comfort. Their hearts became entangled in feelings that, as they both knew, were dangerous and immoral. But the pull of attraction was so strong that neither Raphael nor Eva could resist. Lucas came home late that night, took off his jacket and shoes, paying no attention to the silence that filled the house. He went directly to his bedroom, where he heard strange noises. When he opened the door, his eyes instantly fixed on the scene before him, hitting him like a direct blow. He saw them, Eva and Raphael. She was in his arms, their bodies intertwined, and everything was so obvious that even the air in the room seemed saturated with betrayal. He froze in the doorway, his heart tightened with pain, but something inside him changed instantly. He didn't shout, didn't rush at them, didn't make a scene. His mind was cold, his emotions frozen. Lucas stood motionless as a statue, watching their bodies merge as one. He felt an icy chill spread within him, as his inner world crumbled, but outwardly he remained still, as if nothing was happening. He turned and left, without saying a word, without seeking any justification or creating a scene. He simply walked away. Each of his movements was calculated, as if he already knew what he had to do. He left them there, in bed, at the height of their feelings, while his own world teetered on the edge of destruction. As he left the house, Lucas felt not anger but a cold fury growing inside him, though everything remained hidden. He went to his mechanic's workshop, surrounded by the familiar smells of oil and metal. There, he could be alone with himself, away from the pain that burned him inside. Among old parts and tools, his thoughts took shape. He began to devise a plan. He knew that his revenge had to be precise, quiet, and, most importantly, discreet. Raphael, despite his charisma and status, was vulnerable. Lucas understood that his enemy was not as strong as he seemed. He needed to gather proof of the betrayal so that no one could doubt what had happened. He thought about how to bring everything to its logical conclusion, but in this plan, there was no room for emotion. It was a game of mind and will, with no place for compassion. Lucas knew that if he acted swiftly and intelligently, no one could stop him from his goal of destroying the lives of those who had betrayed him. All he needed was to wait for the right moment and finish his work, leaving no trace. Lucas wasted no time on useless reflections. Every thought focused on a single goal, to punish the one who had destroyed his life. He knew he had to be smart and stealthy, and his plan began to take shape gradually. Several days passed since he had caught them in bed. He followed Raphael, observed his behavior, looked for his weaknesses. Lucas was not a man who acted impulsively. He knew that the only way to achieve his goal was to stay calm and patiently wait for the right moment. Raphael had no idea his life was in danger. He continued with his routine, leading church services, meeting with people, but Lucas was always nearby, always one step ahead. He watched him, learned his schedule, and found ways to stay hidden. One day, at the end of the week, when Raphael stayed in the church after the service, Lucas felt it was time to act. The church was empty, and the streets of Brespirito were already wrapped in the silence of the night. Lucas knew that Raphael often stayed in his office, writing his sermons and replying to letters from the parishioners. Lucas approached the church unseen, knowing exactly what to do. He entered through the back door, hidden from prying eyes, and walked down the aisle like a shadow. He knew Raphael would be there only a few minutes longer before he felt secure. Raphael was seated in his office, absorbed in his work. He didn't hear when Lucas entered the room. By the time he looked up and saw him, it was too late. Lucas approached silently, and in his hand gleamed a knife, cold and shiny. Raphael tried to rise, but it was too late. Lucas was already in front of him, his face showing nothing but determination. "Did you think everything would go your way?" Lucas said in a low voice, but his tone was filled with controlled rage. Raphael managed only to take a step back, trying to understand what was happening. But Lucas was faster. He grabbed him by the shoulder and threw him down onto the desk. The struggle lasted only a few seconds, but for Raphael, those moments felt like an eternity. He tried to scream, to resist, but the knife was already in his abdomen. Lucas felt neither compassion nor hesitation. He was focused on his goal and wouldn't stop. Each movement was precise, like the result of a carefully executed plan. Raphael fell to the ground, his breathing becoming more irregular. At that moment, Lucas felt the weight that had pursued him begin to lift. He stood by, watching life slip away from Raphael's body. There was no joy, only a cold satisfaction in knowing it was over. Lucas wiped the knife with the priest's cloth and, without hurry, turned toward the exit. There was no rush. In his mind, everything was calm. He knew he had done the right thing. Raphael was no longer a threat. But now, in that silence, Lucas felt only one thing: he had regained control. His footsteps echoed in the empty church, resonating in the darkness. In that moment, Brespirito was no longer the same. The small town's secrets, its trust and devotion, had been broken forever. And now, with the priest's body lying on the floor, Lucas knew his revenge was complete. The next day, an unusual silence settled over Brespirito. The morning fog draped the streets like a shroud, and the first rays of sunlight barely pierced the thick gray. As the townspeople, still stunned by the previous day's events, went about their tasks, an eerie calm took hold of the town. Everything changed when the district attorney arrived. The day began when the police arrived at the church. Their presence caused great alarm among the residents, who began whispering and speculating about what could be happening. Shortly afterward, the district attorney appeared, a man with a severe face whom the people of Brespirito had seen only a few times in their lives. He was impeccably dressed, but his eyes reflected the tension he tried to conceal. Raphael's body was found in his church office, and despite efforts to cover up the crime, the evidence left at the scene pointed to the inevitable: the murder had been carried out with cold calculation. The district attorney decided to start the investigation immediately, knowing he couldn't afford to miss the smallest detail. The crime scene was cordoned off, and investigators began searching for clues. The neighbors, who had known Raphael as a respected man, couldn't believe what was happening. They knew him as the good pastor who had been a close advisor, a confidant to many. But now, as his life had been taken so violently, rumors and suspicions began to circulate. Who could have been capable of such an atrocity? Who had killed the priest? But what shocked Eva most was Lucas's complete lack of remorse. In her mind, Eva still couldn't grasp the magnitude of what had happened. But when she saw him at home that afternoon, silently sitting in the darkness, a wave of terror washed over her. "You killed him," Eva said softly, unable to hide her horror. Lucas's gaze remained cold, impassive. He didn't utter a single word, no apology, no justification. He just sat there, calm, as if nothing had happened. That silence was even more terrifying to Eva. "It was necessary," Lucas replied after a long silence. His tone was cold and calculated, as if he were talking about something trivial. Eva couldn't accept what she was hearing. She kept questioning what had happened, but her husband's words fell like stones in her heart, crushing every bit of hope. Meanwhile, the district attorney and investigators were gathering evidence. The bloodstains in the church, the handcuffs found near Raphael's body, everything indicated that the murderer had left nothing to chance. Within a few hours, Lucas was arrested. His face, as he was detained, remained impassive. He didn't resist, nor did he show any remorse. Eva stood in the doorway of her house, unable to comprehend what to do next. The district attorney approached her, and, in horror, she realized she now had to face the full truth, the truth she had been ignoring. Everything she had believed and hoped for was destroyed by the sight of her husband, who seemed to feel neither fear nor remorse. Everything had changed. Brespirito was no longer a place for the ideal they had constructed in their minds. Life, which once seemed so peaceful and predictable, collapsed with terrifying force. Eva felt her world falling apart, her mind filled with pain and confusion, not knowing how to face this new horror. Lucas Brenner's trial took place in the neighboring city, as Brespirito lacked the resources to process a crime of such magnitude. The entire town followed every detail of the trial, and rumors about the events leading up to the murder spread rapidly. Lucas showed no sign of remorse throughout the judicial process. His demeanor was cold and distant, as if everything that had happened was a mere misunderstanding or something inevitable. The defense tried to argue that the murder was an act of self-defense, but the prosecution's evidence was overwhelming. The bloodstains in the church, the marks of violence, and the investigators' testimonies sealed his fate. There was no way to deny that he had killed Raphael Solis with premeditation. The verdict finally came after several days of deliberation. The jury declared Lucas guilty of first-degree murder, and the judge sentenced him to 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole. Lucas listened to the sentence without showing any emotion, as if everything were a series of events he had already anticipated. There were no tears, no cries of anguish, only the same indifferent expression with which he had faced everything that had happened. Meanwhile, Eva, his wife, suffered the worst tragedy. She lost her husband, but the most painful part was realizing that the life she had tried to build with him had been completely destroyed. When the verdict was announced, Eva sat in the courtroom, her eyes vacant and her face gaunt from stress and pain. No one in Brespirito had ever seen Eva in such a devastated state. She had been a reserved, distant woman, but now, faced with the magnitude of the truth, her entire world was crumbling. Eva didn't know what to do with her life. She had lost her husband, but worse was knowing that the life she had tried to build with him no longer existed. When the verdict was pronounced and Lucas was sentenced to 25 years in prison, she felt that everything she had known had vanished. Nothing would ever be the same again. The town, which had once been a familiar and safe place, now seemed strange and unforgiving. Eva felt completely lost, and no one could console her. The place that had once been her home now seemed foreign and cruel. The church, which had been her refuge in dark times, could no longer offer her the answers she so desperately sought. Each day was an inner struggle, a battle to find some glimmer of hope, but she knew nothing would ever be the same. Lucas was sentenced to 25 years in prison, and the life Eva had known no longer existed. Neither she nor he could return to what had been.